divorce rates are at 42% in the UK, with many couples now choosing to say I do when it comes to prenups. But what stipulations would you write into your prenup? You can keep finances. We'll put finances to one side. Everybody talks about those. But did you know that in the UK, embryos can be only used with the consent of both parties? So that's obviously fertilised embryo. Consent can be withdrawn at any time. So quite a few people are putting the kind of the use of embryos into a prenup. And of course, one of the other ones as well is pet ownership.
What, to be allowed to use the embryo?
Yeah, so if it's fertilised and it's frozen and you split up, because there's been a couple of quite nasty court cases around that. But Stacey, you're the only one on the panel that's about to get married at some point. Prenup?
Now I'm thinking about my embryos. Yeah, I do think prenups are sensible if you feel that you need them in place. I don't necessarily think it means you're questioning your relationship. It just means that anything can happen. So have stuff in place.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I do think it's practical.
So what would you put in place then, say, for embryos? Say you had to...
I wouldn't...
That? It's weird, isn't it?
I personally couldn't freeze my embryos and then split half. You know, if I split up with Joe, God forbid, a million times, and we had 6 embryos, 3 each, I could not live knowing that a child of mine was, you know, growing up without me and me not in their lives. So I think I'd have to look at a backup plan of possibly freezing my eggs if I was lucky enough to, so that then, you know, it wouldn't be Joe's child I was raising. This is all hypothetical. I really hope I don't have to
massively
freeze anything. Yeah. But I think it's very complicated. But I think relationships are complicated and complex, and there's far more to it than 50-50 on embryos. Do you know what I mean? You're talking about a life,
though, isn't it? Yeah. Because many would see the embryo as a child, you know, as a child.
Well, there has been some awful court. I mean, there was a court case. I remember a woman who had fertilised embryos with her other half, and they split up, and she would never get the chance to have another child. And he said, I don't want those embryos used. And of course, you know, he is 50% the parent. But Kaye, I just wanted to ask you, so let's just say hypothetically you split up with Ian. Who gets B?
I get to keep the dog. I get the dog. I get the dog.
Have you got that in writing though, Kaye?
Have you discussed that with Ian?
But the dog would come with me. She just would. There she is. She's lying there. She never leaves my side. But it's funny you talking about the prenup thing, in that, you know, it would just be more kind of legal wrangling, isn't it? But what it does do is forces you to have that conversation, you know, before you commit. What would we do in this instance, in this instance, in this instance? And how many people do that? Yeah. You know, I mean, Ian and I aren't married, so it's not really relevant. But I mean, Jane, Nadia, you're both married. Did you sit down, okay, not go to a lawyer, but talk through all the various scenarios? What would happen if, what would happen if, what would happen if?
No. I mean, and it wasn't particularly, because a lot of people say, oh, you know, prenups are so unromantic, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I get what they're saying, but, I mean, we didn't. I think because we were pretty much bringing the same kind of thing into the relationship. I think prenups, quite often, if somebody's got a lot of money and the other person hasn't got much money, they come in a bit there, don't they, in terms of people trying to protect their wealth, maybe. But no, we never did. But when you do a will, it's quite interesting, because when you do a will and you have stepchildren, they really, the lawyers do actually say you've got to be very specific about what you're leaving to a stepchild, because when one person dies, sometimes we all think, oh, of course they'll look after my child, and quite often the step-parent goes, no, you're not having that money.
Yeah. You know what, I'm going to say something quite controversial here, and it probably makes me sound very silly, but I wouldn't marry someone that I would sit down and do a prenup with.
Really?
No. But if I'm really, because I was sitting there thinking, no, prenup's sensible, but actually, if I go to my truth, if I was sitting doing a prenup, I would be thinking somewhere in my head that we were going to break up.
I think that a lot of people have that conception, so it stops a lot of people from having the conversation. Yeah. And actually, the only reason I ever think about worst-case scenario is because I do have children from previous relationships.
Yes, that's different.
And I do think that sometimes when you're in a situation where you could end up on your own again and you don't want to go...
You're protecting them.
Yes, I think it would have probably been very different if I'd had children, actually.
It's not always about the relationship. It's not you not believing in the relationship, because you do. Every relationship I've been in, I've believed in, but they haven't worked. Some haven't worked out, you know.
But let's just say very quickly, Nadia, if you were not married to Mark and you met somebody who was like mega wealthy and he said to you, I want you to sign this prenup before we get married, would you just not do it?
I probably wouldn't go with somebody that would say that to me. I wouldn't. It would turn me off somebody. Because they would have to know that I'm not going to go after their money. They would have to know me.
Misunderstood.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have to go after it. You'd be entitled to it legally. So it's not like you're...
I mean, I see and they're sensible, but I just know what I'm like. I'm very like, it would be no.
Yeah.
It's
no,
over.
who are you? Yeah.
It's
And
over.
who do you think I am? And I'm off. I know. I'm too...
Well...